What is up, everybody? Welcome to Football Diehards. We're going to do an early look preview for the season. We're going to talk some strategy and also get into some plays that stick out from an early look perspective. We still have a lot of questions that need to be answered in terms of starting jobs, etc. And a lot of things are probably going to change within the next week or so. But it's going to be nice to get an early look here. So, Jamie, what is up with you? Are you looking forward to the start of the football season?
I am. It's a 12-month sport for all of us, and we've been talking and leading up to this, but I know you are. I'm a DFS guy first and foremost, so I'm happy that we're finally, within a couple of weeks of the actual season, and we can really get down to building those DFS lineups and getting some winners out there.
Yep, I'm excited for sure. So I thought we could kind of start with some strategy. And I don't know what you like to do, whether it's tournaments or cash, but we'll kind of start from like a cash game, a double up standpoint. What are you looking for in your lineups in like a cash game setting?
Yeah, I'm primarily a cash game player. I will throw in some GPP lineups as well, of course, but of a weekly entry, I would say 85 to 90% of my budget goes to double ups and head to heads. So pretty much from that perspective, I'm looking first and foremost for floor and touches, and usually from that vantage point, I'm paying up for running backs because I know they're getting those guaranteed touches unless there are some screaming values out there, and we'll get into those a little bit later on in the show. And then it's finding out which is the value wide receivers that you're really looking for, especially with week one. They release the pricing so far in advance that you're going to wind up with some 3K, the $3,500 wide receivers based on some of the preseason and some of the roster cuts and moves and everything along those lines. And we got a couple of good ones this week. Ordinarily, this is going to be an interesting one. Ordinarily, I wind up punting tight end a lot in cash game. I think this year is going to be a little bit different, just because of the vast difference in tiers between the top three guys, and what comes next. Sometimes, if you will have one of those sub 3K punts at tight end, that'll stick out to you. But I think I'm going to find myself paying more for tight end. What about you? I don't know a lot about your profile for DFS. Do you cash game GPP?
Yeah, it sounds like we're exactly the same. I'm definitely a cash guy myself. The majority of what I do play each week is cash as well. I'm kind of looking at the same things you're looking for in a cash game, double up setting. I'm looking for a very high floor for the players. I like to look for the high volume players, targets, carries, passing attempts, etc. And I look to be safe and not really take many risks and kind of just play the obvious plays that really do stick out. And I also like to attack the game with the high point totals. So yeah, mostly for me, I'm doing cash games. I'm doing I like the single entries, which is that are like really high priced, but like small field tournaments, like 100 people in the single entries. I like doing those. I think my strategy for single is going to be, play the obvious plays, and I like to mix in some, guys that aren't going to be very high owned and get that upside in there as well. So, but yeah, cash, I like to just play the guys that are safe, nice floor guys, and kind of play the obvious plays.
Yeah. What about where do you stand on stacking in cash games? I get this a lot, and do you kind of make a point to pair your quarterbacks with a wide receiver? I know in GPP that's definitely the preferred path, because you get that upside from one specific offense. But what about in cash games? Do you prioritize
In
doing that,
cash,
or not so much?
no, I don't really prioritize it, to be honest. I kind of just play, the best plays. More so in like a tournament setting, I'll look to, stack it and then kind of run it back with some players on the other end. But for cash, I just don't really like make it a priority to stack it really.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same way. I will find that if I kind of have maybe a high tier wide receivers that I've got very close in my rankings, or that I'm okay with either one of them for cash, it might tip the tiebreaker that way if I have his quarterback. But other than that, I'm pretty much like you.
Yep, sounds like we're definitely on the same. So we'll move on to tournaments a little bit. GBP plays, that this is what the majority of people like. I mean, they want to win that Millie Maker, right? So in terms of tournament strategy, GPPs, what are you kind of looking for on your lineups there?
Well, first of all, I play the same ones that you do. Those kind of small single entry. I think as fun as it is to see those Millie makers, right at the top, right at the top of your contest selection with that glittery $1 million prize. I mean, it's such a negative expected value to play in. So I don't generally do those much. I mean, you gotta either get a wing and a prayer on something that nobody is in, or max it out, and I'm not really prepared to do either for that. So in GPPs, the things I'm looking for a lot, like you said, are some leverage plays off of specific game scripts. Like for instance, if just an example to throw out there, if we're really high on, let's say, I don't know, the Tennessee offense, and they're 10-point favorites at home against a rush defense that isn't that good. And Derrick Henry is projecting as heavy ownership. A little leverage thing I like to do off that is play the passing game of Tennessee, in case the game script flips the other way. That's something I've kind of had some success in, really getting some leverage onto the field. And then it's just searching for those plays that are high upside, high floor, high ceiling players that may not be commanding so much ownership on a given week. Like for instance, this week one, when we get into this plays, there's so many mid tier running backs that I think are going to see ownership, which we'll mention later. So on that note, I think it's maybe a good time to play the McCaffreys and Cooks, and the Henrys, which will probably come in a little bit less than we're used to seeing. I haven't done any ownership runs yet. I don't know if you have, but that's kind of an early look for me.
Yep, I like it there. For me in tournaments, like we said, I'm more of the small field tournaments, but there's a lot of people that are chasing that milli maker, and to win those, you got to be so different because so many people are going to pretty much play the same plays, and you take a look at a lot of the milli maker winning lineups, and there's some plays that nobody expected, plays that are like 1% owned or less at times. So for me, I'm looking for the high upside guys with a big ceiling. Obviously, if you want to win the money, you gotta beat out everybody else, and you need some guys that are going to score some points. I like to target the guys with the big playability as well, with some touchdown upside, and like I said, differentiate yourself from the field. And what I saw last year was playing some of these studs with tough matchups on paper. Because people don't like targeting guys that are going against like really tough matchups. I forget which player it was last year. I think it was Joe Mixon had a very, very tough matchup. He was like less than 5% owned, and he absolutely went off. So I kind of like targeting the guys that are very good with some tough matchup, because I do think the ownership is going to be very, very low on them. But yeah, tournament upside, you gotta be different. Still play a lot of the best plays, but differentiate yourself here and there.
Yeah, and late swap is another thing that I've kind of used to my advantage. That's gone away a little bit as the DraftKings main slates have taken those night games off. But if you're playing in the the all day slates, or the ones that include Monday night, you can really get a lot of leverage on the crowd if you put one of those later players into your flex spot, and you can kind of gauge when the games of Sunday are all said and done, you can see who's got a player ahead of you and almost kind of guess who it is. And you can swap around your players in that spot to kind of give yourself the most, the biggest edge. So if your player wins, you'll shoot past them.
Yep, for sure. Another way to get different. So talked a little bit about strategy. I say we get into the plays. What we should do is probably you'll give a play, I'll give a play, and then we can go from there and just talk about some things that do stick out from an early look perspective. Like I said earlier, there's going to be some things that are going to change. We still have about a week and a half, and I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be different from then. But as a first look, who is a quarterback that sticks out for you?
Yeah, it's so much fun when the pricings have come out this far. Generally, quarterback's a tough one because DraftKings. I don't know if you play on both sites, but DraftKings with the much more dynamic pricing is a little bit harder to get those high tier quarterbacks in than it is on FanDuel, where the pricing is softer. But I mean, right off the bat, I think in week one, I'm comfortable spending a little bit more money on quarterback, because I've already found some pretty significant wide receiver values this week. So it might be one of the few times where I'll pony up all the money for Patrick Mahomes this week. But one that really does stand out to me is Aaron Rodgers, who is the sixth. I'm looking at the thing. Is the sixth highest priced quarterback at 6,800. That seems like a pretty soft price for him. In that sense, I know they're in New Orleans, which is a difficult defense as far as the pass rush goes. But you're talking about a guy who averaged over 25 points per game last year. In cash games at that price, when you can supplement it with some value wide receivers, that seems like a super safe play to me at a discount from some of the other elite quarterbacks.
Yeah, I like it. And I agree that, week one, I mean, there's already so much value at other positions that we'll talk about where, I'm definitely fine with going up and getting a quarterback. And somebody that I really do like this week or going to be week one is going to be Kyler Murray, 7,600 going against Tennessee. You got a 52-point game total, which is the second highest on the slate. You get a $500 savings from Patrick Mahomes. And of course, you have great stacking options, DeAndre Hopkins being one, a very cheap option I like we'll talk about, and Rondale Moore as well. Last year he averaged 25.4 DraftKings points, rushing upside 133 rushing attempts last year, 11 rushing touchdowns as well. So Kyler Murray, you get a nice rushing floor, and I think it's going to be a very high-scoring game with a potential shootout. So for me, my preferred pay-up option is going to be Kyler Murray. Of course, you talked about it. Patrick Mahomes is up there as well. Obviously, a great play against Cleveland with a 53-point game total, which is the highest on the slate. But for me, I'm going to get that $500 savings from Mahomes and get kind of that rushing upside floor. So I like Kyler Murray. Anything else stick out to you for quarterbacks?
I don't know if I'd pull the trigger for cash, but the entire Cincinnati offense feels very cheap to me. And we have question marks, of course, with coming into the season with is Burrow at full strength. Now with with Jamar Chase's drops and Twitter burning over that. If he's going to be kind of what everyone thinks he is right out of the gate. But I mean, you know, Joe Burrow is 5,700, and all of his wide receivers seem to be cheaper than they ought to be as well. We're talking about a team that was second in the NFL in plays per game, behind only Arizona, who you mentioned before Burrow went down. So, particularly in GPP, I think you can unlock a lot of upside with that Cincinnati offense if you're stacking Burrow with any of his wide receivers there. And then that frees you up with a lot of money to pay some stud running backs or tight ends too.
Yeah, I actually was gonna mention Burrow as well. I like Burrow. I like the cheap price. A ton of weapons to stack with, and I think a lot of passing attempts from Burrow. I think he had like 404 passing attempts last year. So yeah, I like
Yep.
Burrow quite a bit as well. Another person that stuck out to me is going to be Ryan Tannehill, and you kind of touched on it earlier that Derrick Henry is going to be very high owned. Ryan Tannehill, he is 6,500 in that 52-point game total, which is the second highest on the slate. And Tannehill actually did pretty solid last year, averaging 21.9 DraftKings points, and he added a big target with Julio Jones as well. So solid weapons, solid stacking options. Brown, Jones, and even Fursker I like as like a cheap tight end as well. And again, should be a high-scoring game with a ton of upside, some serious touchdown upside as well, and even a way to get different from the people that are going to be playing Derrick Henry.
Yes, Robert. I like that too. Robinson was definitely one that stuck out to me, and Robinson. Tannehill. I'm looking at the next thing. Tannehill was definitely one, and like you said, I agree with you that targeting game script and game environment is a really good way to eke out some extra fantasy points. And that Arizona Tennessee one is really talking to me. In all formats.
Yep, I like it for sure. Anything else stick out to you from a quarterback play?
Um, eh, on the flip side, I guess as long as Minnesota's passing offense is at full strength, I think that's an intriguing GPP stack as well. With Cousins, who is a little bit too cheap for someone who averaged over 21 DraftKings points per game. It remains to be seen if Cincinnati's defense is an upgrade yet. But again, we're talking about someone who pushed the pace of football games, and if you're pushing the pace, then you're getting more plays in. So Cousins at 6,300 could be a fun one if you want to stack them with Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen or both.
Yep, for sure. Not much really sticks out to. I guess Ryan Fitzpatrick. I know it's ugly, 5,500. Going against the Chargers. I
Yeah.
don't like the low total of 44.5, but he should be very low owned, a very cheap play with some solid upside. And I really do like the stackable options with McLaurin and Thomas. So Fitzpatrick, just another low owned, low price quarterback that I'm kind of taking a look at. What are your thoughts on Jameis Winston? It was named the Week 1 starter, very cheap. I think he's like 5,200.
The only problem I have with that is who he's going to throw the ball to. A little spoiler alert. When we get to receivers, we're going to have to talk about Marquez Callaway and his price tag. Um, but I mean, you got no Michael Thomas. You got a bunch of suspect receivers. You got a good secondary with Green Bay as well. I think they allowed the third fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. He's very turnover prone. I certainly wouldn't argue at his price tag if someone said they wanted to play him in GPP because he's the last we saw of him he was a 5,000 yard passer. So we know the fantasy points are there. I don't know if I'm I don't know if I'm ready to pull the week 1 trigger on that yet.
Yeah, yeah, good point. Who's he got to throw to exactly? Yeah, that's about it for me from quarterback. Was there anybody else that stuck out to you, or do you want to move on to running back?
Well, we can go to running back, I think, because that one's going to cause me some angst this year, knowing that I can only play 3 of them because I want to play
Yeah.
like 8. But who are you looking at there?
Well, I guess we can start with the obvious option, right? Christian McCaffrey, now 9,500 against the Jets, a 44-point total. He got a home game here last year, week 1. He was actually 10,000, so getting a $500 savings here. Easy 20-plus touch upside, tons of reception upside, which is definitely key. It has that slate breaking potential, really, really high ceiling as well. He averaged 30.1 DraftKings points last year in very few games played. So, obvious option, Christian McCaffrey, elite play, always will be an elite play, elite, reception upside as well. So gotta mention him right off the bat.
Of course.
Who are you looking
What do you
at
think
up
about
there in the
Alvin
top range?
Kamara near the top as well?
I'm
I'm
actually
curious on.
really high. Go ahead.
Yeah. No,
I'm
yeah, go
actually
ahead.
Okay, I'm actually really high on Alvin Kamara week 1 here going against Green Bay. You got that 50-point game total. Kamara last year averaged 24.5 DraftKings points per week. Great matchup against a very poor Packers run defense that I do like targeting. Saints are 3-point underdogs, which will lead to more Kamara receptions if the Saints do fall behind, and I kind of think they do. Reception upside had 88 receptions last year, about 5 per game. The Packers give up the 7th most DraftKings points to opposing running backs last year. And of course, nice savings off of CMC and Dalvin Cook, not only in the price, but terms of ownership more than likely as well.
That's who he's going to throw to, Winston.
Yeah,
So
that's what I was
I,
thinking.
I'm there with you on that. Yeah. Um, Running back is so tough that I'm looking right off the bat here. I'm going to have to see, what I'm willing to pay for it because there are so many mid-tier ones that usually I like to go into that upper realm where we're talking for cash games at least because they're just so safe. They got that floor ceiling combination that you love for cash, but when you go down a little bit more and you see Nick Chubb at 7,200 and Austin Eckler at 7,000 and Aaron Jones at under 7,000. Those are such good values there, even with some more difficult rushing matchups. Um, but one that's actually starting to really stand out to me now is James Robinson, and when the Etienne injury, or if I'm saying it right, when his injury came out, I immediately went and checked Robinson's DraftKings price because I thought it was going to be a little bit less. It winds up that it was quite fair. But still, I'm seeing a lot of value there. You're talking about a guy who was second in opportunity share last year, sixth in carries in the NFL, fifth in rushing yards, also ninth in receptions, 10th in total TDs, and fifth in fantasy points per game. So, throw that in with the fact that he's facing the Houston team that projects to be terrible this year and gave up by far the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. He's starting to emerge as one of those mid-tier options that I feel comfortable about using over other ones in his range.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I am very high on James Robinson in week one. You mentioned the Etienne injury. That's going to be huge for Robinson. And also, yeah, I like the price, 6,400 in a great matchup. You can't really ask for a better matchup against this Houston defense. Speaking around the 6K range, somebody else that stuck out to me is going to be Joe Mixon. 6,200 going against Minnesota with a 48-point game total. A pretty decent total there. The Bengals are 3.5-point underdogs. The Vikings did rank 24th versus running backs last year. Mixon averaged 17.3 DraftKings points in the very few games he did play last year. And, he has some reception upside as well. 21 receptions last year in 6 games, not too terrible there. And he did average 23 total touches last year. So, we're getting a ton of volume from Mixon with the rushing attempts and possible reception upside as well. I like the matchup, and I really do like the price of Mixon at 6,200 for the volume that we're likely to get.
I love it. And you and I haven't followed each other on Twitter very long, but you'll soon find that I'm one of the biggest Joe Mixon stands out there. I have him ranked on Fantasy Pros. I have him ranked QB8, and I'm trying to talk myself into going higher just based on that opportunity that you talked about. And 6,200 seems like a gift to me. And I mentioned Burrow and his receivers. I'm already kind of formulating plans in my head that Mixon will be in my cash lineup, and the Bengals passing game will be heavily used in GPP.
Yep, definitely with you there. I'm a big Mixon guy myself. Anything sticking out to you from a running back perspective?
Um, well, it's kind of a difficult matchup. By the way, I was very sad to remember that Baltimore isn't on the main slate this year because I'm a big Gus Edwards guy as well. I started a fight on Twitter today about that. But alas, I'll probably play some full slates just so I can get some action on him because I think he's going to be big. But Antonio Gibson under 6,000, even against the Chargers, who ranked 8th against the running back position last year. That to me seems a little bit too cheap that I'll at least want to get some GPP exposure to him. You pointed out the low total on that game because Washington is a defensive. It's going to be slower and defensive, but I think the Chargers can push the pace enough there. Gibson, they've shown a propensity to use him more in the passing game this year, so 5,900 seems like a pretty good value to him there as well.
Yeah, very, very cheap for someone as talented as Gibson there. Like you said, the total does concern me a little bit, but he's still going to get quite a few carries. And like you mentioned, the passing, hopefully he's involved more in the passing game as well. Something that we didn't touch on up in the top range, Dalvin Cook, 9,100 going against the Bengals, obviously going to be very popular and for a very good reason. He's an absolute beast, a 48-point total here. You do get the $400 savings off of Christian McCaffrey. It is a solid matchup against the Bengals where the Vikings are favored by 3.5 points. Cook did average 21.6 DraftKings points per week last year. Has a lot of touchdown upside with 17 touchdowns last year, 20-plus touch upside easily, especially in a game that they're favored and expect to be ahead as well. I can see a lot of running if they do get ahead. Nice game script upside for Dalvin Cook as well. I don't think he has the reception upside or nothing like that like a McCaffrey. So for me, it is probably going up and getting McCaffrey, but you can't really go wrong with Dalvin Cook at all.
Yeah, and I think if people are thinking along the lines of what we're saying, if you're in that position where you're either going to go up to McCaffrey or down to Kamara, you're probably going to get a very low ownership on Cook, which can give you some of the GPP leverage because he absolutely has the ability and the opportunity to outscore both of them. So that's a good point there too. Question for you: What do you think? I'm a little scared of the 49ers running back situation, but what do you think about any of them in cash or GPP? Because we can't deny the matchup against Detroit, who gave up the second most fantasy points per games to running backs, and it's probably going to be a bad team that people will run on again. So where do you stand on any of those in any format?
I just don't know. I see the matchup, very good matchup against Detroit, who was 31st in running backs last year. The problem is, I just don't know who's going to get the majority of the carries, Mostert or Sermon. I'm hoping within the next week and a half that we will get some more information. So hopefully the next time we talk, hopefully we'll know a little bit better who's going to get the majority of the carries. So as of now, I don't know, I'm just kind of waiting for some news as of now, really.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. I'm sure I'll wind up taking some prayers on them in some of the bigger GPPs. Probably with a little bit more of a lean towards Mostert right now, just because he's had more camp work and he's healthy right now. But yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, but even then, like Mostert, typically does split carries throughout his career, and there's games where he just completely goes off and nobody has him. So
Mhm.
yeah, Mostert, I like Mostert quite a bit. Just hoping he'll get the majority of the carries, and then I'll really be on him. But yeah, I like Mostert.
All right, awesome.
All right.
Any other running backs there, or should we go
Yeah,
to
I
wide
mean,
receiver?
there's a couple other ones that stick out. I would like your thoughts on Mike Davis at Atlanta. What do you think about Mike Davis?
Well, I'm scrolling down here. Yeah, I'm okay with it. It's he's kind of gotten a bit of a stigma at being just a guy, which I understand why. After he kind of petered out towards the end of last year, after really coming out blazing in relief of McCaffrey, but this guy was very very serviceable when he was the main guy for Carolina. He was, and not just on the ground. He was fifth in targets and fourth in receptions, ninth in receiving yards among running backs. His efficiency was not the best as far as yards per touch, but he was actually third in the NFL in juke rate, which is a stat that Player Profile puts a lot of emphasis on. So I think you're definitely going to get him at almost no ownership. So I have no issue really there. Philadelphia is a middle of the road defense last year against the run, and there doesn't really seem to be any competition for him in the backfield right now.
Yeah, just kind of a cheap guy that RB1 for the team. So another one that's kind of interesting. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this one. He's 4,000. Javonte Williams from the Broncos. Any thoughts on him?
Well, that's a difficult one for me. I've been so down on him as far as his ADP goes in seasonal, so it's kind of getting hard for me to talk myself into him. Um, but I think I week one I'm probably gonna not do it, but I do think it's important to watch that situation and see how it pans out and figure that out before if he's going to take over the role as the lead guy in that backfield. I think it's important to kind of guess that week in advance of when he actually does before his price goes up. But I don't think I'm going to do it in week one, even though his matchup is decent.
Yeah, definitely a tricky one there for sure. So, yeah, let's move on to wide receivers. And man, there's a ton of spots that stick out here, especially from a value standpoint as well. But let's start up top. Up top, what's sticking out to you?
Um, I mean, this is kind of going along the lines of what I said earlier that might be the tipping point of who I go with at quarterback if I want to kind of pair it. Um, I think the two receivers that stand out to me at the top are the two that are paired with the quarterbacks that you and I talked about in the high end, either all the way up to Devonte Adams, who is often in a tier of his own as far as PPR floor goes on DraftKings, um, or DeAndre Hopkins in the game environment that we've already harped on. Tennessee did nothing to help themselves in the back end. They're actually probably projecting to be worse this year with the departure of Adoree Jackson. They gave up the fourth or the fifth most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Hopkins is a super safe um, catch guy, so he's definitely one that if I'm in that upper realm, I'm looking at for cash. I'm figuring you're looking the same way, but anyone else in that tier, maybe above him?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you got, like you said, Tyreek Hill, Devonta Adams, always great options you can play week after week. Something that I do like, just 100 above DeAndre Hopkins, is going to be Calvin Ridley, who is 7,900 going against Philly. You got the 48-point game total. where the Falcons are 3.5-point favorites. So, no more Julio Jones. Really should definitely see an increase in targets this year as a whole. He averaged 20.4 DraftKings points last year, averaged 91.6 yards per game, had 9 touchdowns. A great matchup here against Philly, who did rank 27th last year in terms of points given up against wide receivers. And again, should see a ton of targets and should have some solid upside with a solid matchup. So for me, I do like Hopkins as well, right there with you. But I do like Calvin Ridley as well for $100 more.
I like Ridley as well, and I like Jefferson too, as long as he's healthy. One underneath Hopkins. Probably not from a cash perspective. I think the two guys we mentioned, Hopkins and Ridley, are a bit safer in that regard, but Jefferson showed that requisite upside for GPPs. So maybe if the ownership is swinging the way we're talking about, I'll look to Jefferson in a GPP. I also think Keenan Allen is far too cheap at 6,900. Washington is not the greatest matchup against the pass, but we're talking about a guy who had 147 targets last year, over 10 and a half per game, and that is taking into account Tyrod Taylor into that equation as well. Once Justin Herbert actually took over, Keenan Allen actually led the league in targets per game, finished with 100 catches. Was 7th in fantasy points per game, and the price just doesn't match that. So he's a fun one to put in here for a Chargers offense that I really would like to get a piece of.
Yeah, I mean, you can never go wrong with Keenan Allen, right? I mean, the volume this guy gets is just something great. Somebody else up in that 7K range I do like is going to be Stephon Diggs, 7,600 going against Pittsburgh. Got a 40.5-point game total. Not the best matchup in the world, but not a matchup I'm really scared of. You get the price savings off of Hill, Adams, Hopkins, Ridley, etc. He did average 22 DraftKings points per game last year. He totaled a massive 1,800 yards and an insane 147 receptions. Just a ton of upside here for Diggs and a very solid total of 40.5 points. Reception upside, nice ceiling against, like I said, an okay Steelers defense that is pretty solid, but I'm not shying away from Diggs in this spot. I just feel like Diggs is just a little bit too cheaper. I mean, he did phenomenal last year, and I'm expecting him to have another phenomenal year this year.
Yeah, the price is puzzling to me, actually. I'm assuming it's taking into account the matchup against Pittsburgh on paper is tougher than, say, Ridley's against Philadelphia, Hopkins against Tennessee, Hills against Cleveland, which I get. But, like you said, he's 22 DraftKings points per game, which was third. Only Hill and Adams were better than that last year. So it's funny, that the matchup would be taken that much into account just for him, which I think he proved last year that he's matchup proof. So I like that as well. Would you stack Josh Allen with him in a GPP?
Yeah, I would. I think, like you said, the matchup probably does take away some ownership from that side as well. So I do like that.
Yeah, why not? How about the flip side of that game, the Pittsburgh wide receivers? You got two of them in that lower 6K, and then lower down it's Claypool at 5,600. Do you like any of them?
I don't hate them. I mean, I don't really love the matchup against a pretty solid Buffalo defense, but yeah, I think they're fine. Not something that I was looking to target personally. Are you more high on the Steelers offense?
I am more long term for this season. I don't know about this opening matchup. I would like to see first how Roethlisberger looks, and also how Najee Harris is incorporated into that offense before I start going all in on that offense. So, I have all three of those receivers ranked within the top 25 or 26 for the season long, but I think this is probably a pass for DFS for week 1.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Johnson, Juju, Claypool, one of them, went off. It's just hard to really gauge like which one is going to be this week. That's the problem I'm having. But I do like the Steelers as a whole because they throw the ball a ton. So yeah, definitely get that as well. Anything else sticking out to you and kind of in this mid range, 5,000 to 7,000?
Well, I mentioned Boyd, or I didn't mention Boyd. I mentioned the Cincinnati receivers. I think Boyd is a really good play at 5,200, even with 3 wide receivers and a healthy mix in there. That seems a bit too cheap for him against Minnesota, who is 25th against opposing wide receivers. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper to see how, because I'm a Giants fan, so I haven't really decided who I think James Bradbury is going to shadow of the Denver wide receivers. But whichever one he doesn't, I think is far too cheap. I think I could get on board with playing Jerry Jeudy at 4,800 regardless,
Yep.
just because they can line him up in the slot a little bit more. And then Corey Davis. Corey Davis is making a nice little case to be in my cash lineup at 4,900 with the what he showed with the chemistry he showed already with Zach Wilson, and he was wide receiver 30 last year, and he's being drafted as the wide receiver 50 off the board. So, and now he's the wide receiver 1 in a team that's going to pass more. So 4,900 stands out to me for him.
Yep, Corey Davis, somebody that definitely stuck out to me. Somebody I did like quite a bit is going to be Brandon Ayuk, 5,700 going against Detroit. You have a 45.5 point total. Just seems way too cheap here at 5,700. I'm a big Ayuk guy. I like this guy quite a bit. A great matchup against the Detroit defense, who ranked 31st last year in wide receivers and points given up. Ayuk averaged a solid 15.9 DraftKings points per game last year, averaged 7 targets per game as well, and just some solid upside at a really good price in my opinion. 5,700. Just seems way too cheap for somebody in Ayuk who, I'm pretty high on the guy myself. I think he's a very good player, and with such a great matchup here against Detroit, I like Ayuk quite a bit.
It's funny, on the other podcast that I'm on Thursday nights, we built a cash line up there, and he made the cut in there at 5,700. We talked a lot about him and his role and his matchup and that price that just didn't seem to match the production. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
How about
So
the bottom of the barrel?
Yep. In terms of bottom of the barrel, somebody that does stick out to me, Rondale Moore, 3,000, 52-point game total here, which is the second highest on the slate. Should get a solid amount of looks here in the slot, good reception upside at the price, minimum salary, no Larry Fitzgerald, of course, high total, and what should be a shootout. I don't hate, Rondale Moore, 3K.
Rondale Moore is, at ADP, my favorite rookie receiver in this class. And I have publicly wrote about this on Football Diehards, tweeted about it. I think he is going to be the wide receiver 2 in that offense quickly this year. Christian Kirk was a fun deep play specialist, but I think he's going to devolve into a special teamer more than anything else. AJ Green was quite possibly the worst receiver in the NFL last year. It's possible, he's looked pretty good in the preseason. It's possible that he revitalizes himself, but it's not like he's coming from an offense that wasn't pass friendly anyway. The Arizona offense led the NFL in 3 wide receiver sets and 4 wide receiver sets. They don't have a tight end, so there's no reason to think that that's not going to happen again. So I am over the moon for Rondale Moore, so I'm glad you are as well. My pick for cash. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's no downside there. And I got another one too. I have a feeling he's going to be heavy chalk here. But Terrace Marshall is also 3K. He's been lighting camp on fire. He's shown big playability, and they're lining him up out of the slot. We know Sam Darnold favors the slot. I do think, he's going to be fighting for targets there with DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Christian McCaffrey. But I think just like Rondale Moore, at the minimum 3,000, there's way more reward than risk.
Yeah, I like it for sure. Something else that stuck out to me, we talked about him, I think, a little bit. Marquez Callaway, any interest there? 3,400.
Yeah, and unless people are forgetting what he did, which I don't think they will, I assume he's going to be one of the highest owned receivers on the slate. He caught all 5 of his targets for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in that last preseason wins. And that was all, with Jameis Winston. He's certainly capitalizing on his opportunity. It looks like with Winston that Sean Payton is going for a more vertical game, which is his thing. I mentioned before that the matchup against Green Bay is not good for passing defense, but somebody's got to get that ball, and they have very few options outside of Kamara. So 3,400, yeah, he's probably going to be in there for me.
Yep, 100%. We talked a little bit about the Bengals wide receivers. Boyd, Chase is 4,000, Higgins 4,700. I kind of like all three of those, to be honest. All three very, very cheap with some upside. Somebody even talked about Marvin Jones Jr. 3,600. Any interest there? Really cheap guy. Good matchup against Houston.
Well, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I didn't even know that. That one slipped right past me, but absolutely, he's the best wide receiver on that team, I think. And Lawrence was, showing an affinity towards him easily. I do think there's a ton of targets to go around in that, but yeah, 3,600. I think you found a diamond in the rough with there.
Yeah, I mean, really cheap. Houston defense. I like it. I guess one more that kind of stuck out to me. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. This is kind of probably going to be a really low owned play, but maybe a potential bounce back spot in a game that should score very well. Highest total on the slate. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Odell Beckham Jr. 5,400.
um, yeah, that's for sure a GPP play. You know, KC, that they're a weird defense. They were first in fantasy points per game allowed to opposing wide receivers. That's a little bit deceiving, though, because they're inviting so much more opportunity with their pace, and the game script that they put on a lot of other teams. Yeah, I really like him, especially if you want to go out and pay for a Mahomes, Kelsey, Hill stack, which is going to cost you a ton of money. It's possible to get him in there as a bring back, which I think is huge. You're not going to get Chubb or or even Landry is pushing it a little bit, but 5,400 for Odell is that's big upside, I think, for tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems cheap, especially in the game where it's the highest scoring total on the slate. So I don't know, don't hate it there. So we'll move into the tight ends here. It's a weird week for me. Tight ends typically I do like paying down, but there's just somebody that completely sticks out, and it's going to be Travis Kelsey, 8,300 going into Cleveland. Like I said, the 53-point game total, which is the highest on the slate, and Travis Kelsey is elite. And the Browns defense does tend to struggle against the tight end. And he averaged 23.7 DraftKings points per week. Just a ton of upside here for Kelsey. He had 1,776 yards and 14 touchdowns last year. I think he only had like 1 week the entire season when he went under 10 points. So, I mean, the upside, the floor, the ceiling is all there for Kelsey. And he's my favorite pay up option at tight end by a mile. So, do you like Kelsey as much as me? Or are you more so looking to kind of pay down at tight end?
Usually I am like you, and I like to save money at tight end. I mentioned at the beginning of this show, I think that might be a little bit different. I mean, I can't imagine not paying for him this week. When it seems like it's such a tough move to do because he's $2,000 more than George Kittle, who is the next highest price, who I also like, by the way, at that price. If I can't afford Kelsey, I think I'm fine going with Kittle at 6,300 as well. Um, but you know, Kittle Kittle's matchup is actually bad. Detroit has a defensive scheme that limits the tight end, and Kelsey certainly does not. Do you know how many wide receivers, like if we were to group Kelsey with the wide receivers, do you know how many wide receivers had more points per game than him offhand?
If I had to guess, it'd maybe be two or three.
It's one. It's
One.
Devonte Adams, and that's it. Yeah. So I mean, you know, it seems like it's wasting money to pay up for a tight end, with opportunity costs with ways you can save. But I mean, he's so worth it, and he's priced he's priced with those wide receivers, but he is better than them. So and on that offense, in like you said, the highest scoring total. Yeah, I mean, if I can get him in, he's going to be one of the high price players that I work to get in almost ahead of all others. And I think it can be done with those value receivers we've talked about.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm thinking as well. Paying up a tight end, maybe paying up a quarterback, and then kind of digging down and finding some value wide receivers because yeah, we did touch on a ton of those. So yeah, for me, I'm definitely paying up for Kelsey, but there are some decent options down, in this bottom range in terms of tight ends. Anything sticking out to you in this bottom range?
Um, I think Kyle Pitts is going to be a fun one at 4,400. I think for cash, his ownership might, or I should say for GPPs, his ownership might be a little bit higher than I'm comfortable with, but that could push me that way in cash. I mean, it's not the greatest price when you can get other values in the 3K range, but that's for somebody who is profiling to be such a good football player as him against the Philadelphia team that gave up the sixth most fantasy points per game to the position last year. I mean, I don't think that's a bad play at 4,400. It's just tough to trust a rookie tight end in the first game.
Yep, I'm with you there. Kyle Pitts is definitely something I'm looking at as well. Um, I mean, not much really sticks out to me in terms of tight end. I just see myself either going up and paying for Kelsey or yeah, I do like that Pitts call as well. I guess somebody else that sticks out, probably gonna be very low owned. Logan Thomas, 4,600, going against that Chargers defense. Very low total that I do not like, but just a slight concern there. He should see a decent amount of targets like he did last year. You do get a nice upgrade in quarterback with Ryan Fitzmagic. That should help a ton as well. And just seems a little too cheap for the target upside he has. But again, low scoring total. Don't love it. I personally do like Pitts a little bit better for 200 less, but Logan Thomas is somebody that I am at least considering.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about him as well too, because he burst onto the scene, and the matchup against the Chargers is really not bad either for tight ends. What about a couple? If you want to really get cheap here, while back when I did a show, we talked about Adam Troutman a lot at 2,900, and he was kind of the cheap guy that I was gonna do. His status is up in the air. What do you think now with Irv Smith out? I mean, Tyler Conklin is banged up, but he's also 2,900 in a good matchup against Cincinnati. Is he someone you might consider?
He's actually someone that I was considering for like a very cheap play. I don't love it, but yeah, I mean he's gonna get opportunities. I like the matchup, and yeah, he's very cheap, so I can see myself playing it in like a tournament. But as far as cash, I'm probably gonna go big at Kelsey. But yeah, Conklin's definitely somebody down there that I was looking at. Somebody else down in that really cheap range. Anthony Ferkser, 3,200. Any interest in him?
Yeah, he. I've kind of backed off. I was like super high on him way earlier in the preseason. Um, I'm a little bit worried that the Titans aren't going to view him as a reliable blocking option, which would keep his snap count down. But the way they run that offense, I'm not as worried about Julio Jones there hurting him as much as himself hurting him. um, but he lined up out of the slot a lot, and Tennessee actually targeted their receivers in the slot in the top 10 in the NFL last year. So yeah, there is definitely room for him to have success there. Um, and we've harped on this game total a lot with Tennessee and Arizona. So I'm really not opposed to any offensive option in that game in GPP. I definitely wouldn't play him in cash, but yeah, I'm fine with him there.
Yeah, I don't hate it. Yeah, I do like that Conklin call quite a bit for 300 more as well. Yeah, for me, I mean that's pretty much it. I mean, not really anything sticks out too much for tight end. I mean, Kelsey's there, Pitts. Those are probably my top two. Anything stick out to you? Anything else?
No, I would think it would be Kelsey. Is I'm going to make every opportunity to do. If there's excess money, I'll use Pitts, and if there's not, I'll have to go all the way down into that Conklin Troutman range. One more actually. What do you think about Gerald Everett? He's been a little bit of a fantasy darling to people, and he's only 3,400. I'm not sold on him as other people are as much. I get that he's reunited with his coach there in Seattle. I'm not even honestly convinced he's going to take over the top of the depth chart right away in Seattle because they do have Disley there and he's healthy. I'm curious your thoughts on him.
I mean, not many thoughts to be honest. I think he's fine. I've heard people talking about him, quite a bit as well. I'm not as high as other people are, but 3,400, he's cheap. But for me, I'm not the biggest Everett guy myself. But I do like for sure, like you said, Conklin a little bit more. But yeah, he's somebody I think will have a little bit of ownership, but I can't see myself getting there personally. Just still some question marks with Everett for the time being. I'm going to kind of take a couple weeks and see how he does with this offense.
Sure. Yep. I'm with you on that one.
All right, so we could talk about defense a little bit. I didn't really, research defense too much. Anything stick out to you first look from a defensive perspective?
I pay as little as possible for defenses in cash. It's basically what I'll do is I'll start from the bottom and I'll go up until until I find someone that I think is adequate enough that I don't think they're just destined for negative points. And I haven't looked too much at defenses either yet. But I mean, even if I'm starting at the bottom, I really am fine using the Falcons at the minimum price home against the Eagles. I mean, it's possible they give up 40 points in that game, but it's also possible that Jalen Hurts throws 3 picks. If I want to try and get a little bit safer, I think you can go up maybe the Bills at home against Pittsburgh at 2,500 isn't bad. Jacksonville against Houston, depending on who the quarterback is for Houston. But I tend to not put a lot of stock into which defense I like as much as how much I can save money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% the same way. I like paying down at defense. And you mentioned Atlanta, somebody that I'm definitely targeting, 2K minimum price. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. You also mentioned another one that I was looking at. Buffalo could be something to look at as well.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to pay up, maybe Denver against the Giants. So, but yeah, I'm more with you. Just paying down at defense, $2,000 Atlanta. That's probably where I'll end up in cash.
I mean, unless something drastic happens there within the next 2 weeks, I mean, it seems like a good move for cash.
Yep, I like it for sure. So yeah, that's about it. Any final thoughts you have for the slate or anything as a whole?
I would say to anybody who listened to us to pay close attention to the cuts tomorrow. There's probably bound to be a few significant ones that could launch some names in that we didn't mention here. I think we're all watching a couple of specific ones that I've heard rumors about. Like they've said Latavius Murray might be cut from the Saints. That would be interesting. I think that would make me like Kamara even more, and that would also make his name is it Tony? Tony, what is his name? It's escaping me at the moment.
I don't know.
Tony Jones Jr. or Tony Jones
like
Jr. to take over, who's made a strong impression through those preseason games. If they run that I formation at all, and he gets like a Murray role, maybe he's a fun GPP 4K play. I don't know. But yeah, definitely watch for any significant cuts tomorrow.
Yep, for sure. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we're probably gonna, a lot of things are probably going to open up. Maybe we get another injury or two that pops up for sure. So next time we talk, I'm sure there's going to be definitely some new things to talk about. But yeah, guys, that's about it. Thank you guys for watching. We will be back very soon. I think we're going to be doing a video. I think he said Wednesday and potentially Sunday morning as well. So tune in for that. Again, thank you guys for watching and